Hi, everybody. This is Mary Beth from Operation Parent, and I just wanted to welcome you into the webinar today. Our topic is human trafficking, and our presenter is Amy Leanertz of Free to Hope. We're going to get started in about 2 minutes. Like we do every time, we're going to just ask you that those of you that are here to go ahead and go to the question section in your panel. And if you wouldn't mind, just typing in your name and where you're from. And if this is the first time you've ever attended one of our webinars, just put down there first timer. We'd like to see who's new to our webinars. So if you go ahead and do that. Hi, Julie from Toledo, and they're coming in. Give me a minute. Great, thank you guys. Let me get that out here so I can. All right, let's go through here. All right, why are you not allowing me? I'm going to be muttering, guys, sorry. Here we go, now I can see a little bit better. All right. Beth, first time, welcome Beth. Brittany, first time from South Carolina. Sonia from Phoenix, Arizona, first time. Beth, I got a Chloe from Idaho Falls, Idaho. A couple Louisville people. A Caitlin from Pittsburgh, first time. Susie LaGrange, Sadie from Maryland. A couple people from Sandusky. I see a Devin. A lot of Pennsylvania people. Clarion, another person from Clarion, Julie. Olivia from New York. Cynthia from Toledo. I got a Charla from Butler County, Ohio, first time, welcome. Okay, somebody's asking, please repeat the request. All I'm just asking, if you just put your name in to the question section, where you're from, and if this is your first time you've ever attended an Operation Parent webinar, we'd just like to know that. Thank you. Erin, first time, Wisconsin. Let's see, Jody from Sheboygan, second timer, all right, Jody. Maggie from Pennsylvania, first time. I'm loving all the Pennsylvania people because I am from north of Philadelphia in Levittown, so it's great to see all these people from Pennsylvania. All right, I got to see a Matthew. Derek from Sheboygan, first time. So Carol, first time from New Mexico. Crystal, Matthew, another Lebanon, Pennsylvania. And all right, thank you guys. This is great. I can't go through everybody, but I really appreciate you guys putting your name and everything in there. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and get the presentation started. Again, my name is Mary Beth from Operation Parent. I'm Director of Program Development here at Operation Parent. Just a reminder too for what we're discussing in the next month. We have another webinar lined up for you it's called Alcohol, Drugs, and You. This is a book. It's actually a series of 2 books by the authors Mark and Leanna Treitler, and they will be coming on. Mark is a recovering alcoholic, and Leanna is his daughter who is happening to be going off to college, but they wrote a series, 2 books. One's called Alcohol, Drugs, and You, A Young Person's Guide to Avoiding Addiction. And the other one is My Dad is an Alcoholic, What About Me? And so they will be discussing in interview format predisposition to alcoholism, addiction in general, but then some warning signs. It's really great conversation. I hope you all can attend. It's going to be on Tuesday, August 14th from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Again, it's already up on our website, so please go ahead and sign on to our website and you can register right there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, my coworker, and she is going to take you through some of the information you need to know about the GoToWebinar. And then I will catch up to you at the end and during the question and answer section. Hold on, let me just shut my microphone off and turn on Michelle's. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. It's Michelle Massey. As Mary Beth mentioned, I'm her colleague on the program development team here at Operation Parent. I'm also in the thick of raising two strong, smart teen gals myself. I'm just going to take you quickly through the control panels so you know how to participate with us today. And I'm excited to do that. We're all excited to be coming to you right outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and that we're going to learn together today. So first on your webinar control panel, you'll see an orange tab with an arrow. This tab allows you to open and minimize the control panel. If you wish to view your screen without the control panel, just click on that orange tab and minimize it. For now though, please click on the orange arrow to open your control panel and view all the features with me. We'll be utilizing the question feature today. I do want you to know that all attendees will be muted during the presentation. We would, however, like to hear from you via the question section. About halfway down the control panel, you'll see this section. You'll send both questions and comments here. There are 3 panels there. The top panel will show you questions you've already posted. Below that is another light blue panel where you can type your questions and send them directly to us. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar today, we don't anticipate that, but if something comes up with your sound or you're noticing something, feel free to let me know there and we'll take a look into it. You can send us questions anytime during this live webinar. All questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Just note we may go a bit over the 60-minute mark with the question and answer segment. So if your schedule doesn't allow you to stay for that remaining part, just know that you can finish up by listening to the recording at a later time. We've got some awesome handouts put together for you today. One titled Facts, a fact sheet for identifying victims. The other one are red flags on human trafficking. There's a fact sheet for parent and guardians, as well as one for those of you who might be in the school system. We've also provided a copy of the handout, the slides today as a handout. And so just double click on any of those handouts or all of them to begin the download process. The handouts will only be available to you while we're in this session. Once the webinar has ended, you will not be able to download the handouts. So please take a minute now and do so. About an hour ago, we also sent you an email containing the handouts. So if you don't download the handouts during this live webinar, please look for them in your email. We are recording this presentation and this recording will be sent to you tomorrow afternoon. There will be a short survey sent to you directly after the webinar. It will take about 2 minutes to complete and your feedback is invaluable to us. So those are the technical components of the system today. And now it is my distinct pleasure to turn it over to Amy Leenertz.
Good afternoon. I am really elated to see so many people on here today that want to learn about trafficking. I started Free to Hope about 6 years ago now. I did it for a lot of different reasons. Part of it is some of the abuses that happened to me as a child. We talk a little bit about that. That's not my main focus, but I also want people to realize how these things evolve over years and how it's not usually one thing that can get a child into this kind of lifestyle, that it's a progressive thing. Free to Hope, as I said, has existed for about 6 years now. We have lots of different programs where we work with survivors, where we help survivors get out of human trafficking. We have a drop-in center that is probably one of the most fun things that I do. I absolutely love the days that we have drop-in centers. We have a place where people just come together, the women come together, and we offer them services. We have a very non-clinical place that they can come to, and we show them how important they are. We do all kinds of artwork, therapeutic type of artwork, and just generally meet them where they're at. We also connect the victims to the resources, if we need to get them into housing, if we need to get them out of trafficking, if we need to get the police involved, if we need to just whatever it is this person needs, we connect them to, or we get it for them one way or another to try and get them out when they're ready. Human trafficking is it's so prolific now that we've got to start getting a hold of these things. So I'm really happy that you guys are here to learn more about it. So some of the outcomes: participants will become familiar with the methods of how trafficking victims are recruited and be able to recognize the warning signs. Next, you will also gain increased situational awareness regarding various social media forms as it relates to the victimization of teens. And lastly, human trafficking is one of the fastest growing criminal industries in the world, but this session will help equip you with the tools you need to keep your teens safe. So let's start out with what human trafficking is not, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about what it is. It is not a bad management. It's not a bad boss. It is not human smuggling. Okay, human smuggling is something that might go along with human trafficking, but it's something totally different. Smuggling is when somebody is coming into the country illegally. Human trafficking is something totally different than that. Now, often human smuggling does go in tandem with trafficking, but they're not the same thing. And also voluntary prostitution, somebody that's willingly choosing to engage in a sex act for personal profit. Now, there's a lot of myths that go along with human trafficking. Some of the biggest are victims are only foreign nationals or immigrants. We think they're from somewhere over across the sea or from Asia or some other different country. That's a big myth. And also another big one is that victims will come forward, that they'll tell us that they're victims. Quite frankly, that simply does not happen very often. They don't even necessarily understand what the term human trafficking means. So let's get started. What is human trafficking? It's modern day slavery. And I know this becomes a little bit cliche because people say this a lot, but it really is. It involves the use of force, fraud, and coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act from someone. So let's start with labor trafficking. This is where people are forced or made to work for little or no money through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. It's often underground, it's unregulated, and there are wage, health, and safety violations when it comes to labor trafficking. Now, some of the different venues that we see this at, and there are more, but these are just some of the more ones that are seen more, I would say. Salons and spas. Agriculture. We have a lot of farms in Kentucky. A lot of places are like that, but we're going to find that we're going to have people that coming from foreign countries that probably are not U.S. citizens, and they're going to be out, and no one is going to be able to see them and interact with them daily. So they're easily victimized in labor trafficking. Domestic servitude. Now, this is something where somebody is going to work in a private home, so they're not going to be out where you can see them very much. In hotels, this is another big one. The racing industry, restaurants, and traveling solicitation. Now, this one's really interesting because this usually happens to kids around the age of 14 to 22, perhaps. Now, if you've ever had a kid come to your door before trying to sell you something, you possibly could have seen a victim of human trafficking. Now, what happens is a handler will go around to really impoverished areas and find kids that just have absolutely no opportunities to go to work. They have maybe don't really have any parents in the home or don't have one that can be there for them to answer questions, to help them to get a job, to help them to get out and do some things. So these handlers will come by and they'll talk to these kids and say, you know what? We can get you vacations. We can get you money. You can travel around the United States. You can earn all these extra vacations. You can do all these wonderful things if you'll go with us. So it looks legit enough. The young adult will go with them. Problem is, what really happens is they get charged for every single thing. Now, they can end up in a room with 12 other people. They might get once or twice a day they might eat. And they're getting charged for this as well as the hotel. So really, what's happening to this kid is they have no idea that they're actually not making any money to speak of on this. Eventually, this kid will get angry, and often what has happened in the past is these kids have been kicked out and they've been left in cities far away from their own city with no money and no way to get back home. Now, you remember they actually picked these kids out of areas where there was nobody that could help them. So they have kind of ensured that these kids are totally on their own. And what has happened again is this kid who has been labor trafficked has now maybe possibly had to sell themselves for sex, which is sex trafficking. So those are just some of the places that we see where labor trafficking happens. Next, we'll talk about sex trafficking. This occurs when people are forced into the commercial sex industry through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. If you look on there to the side, you'll see all the different kinds of commercial sex. Now, sex trafficking of minors occurs when the person is under the age of 18, is induced, persuaded, or influenced to engage in commercial sex. A couple of side notes, the average age for entry into the sex trade in America is 12 to 14 years old. And there's at least 100,000 U.S. kids that are exploited in prostitution every year in the United States. Now, the big thing you need to know with sex trafficking of minors is there is no need to have any kind of force, fraud, or coercion. It's not required. Okay, so this child is automatically a victim 100% of the time. And that's the big thing we need to know with kids, whether it's labor trafficking or whether it's sex trafficking. If they're under the age of 18, they are victims. So some of the different places we're going to see sex trafficking. Again, there are more, but these are some of the more outstanding ones, I guess, that we see. Bars and strip clubs are one place. Escort services, which you would probably expect to some extent. Sex shops and pornography. Outdoor solicitation. Massage, health, and beauty places. This side note, if you've ever been to one of these massage places or health and beauty places, you pull up to it and you see all the windows down, they're blacked out, and you see cameras on the edge. You have to think, is that really a reputable place, or is something more going on there? So usually these things, they're hidden, but there are clues to it. Another place you can also see sex trafficking is residential places in somebody's home. It can happen in apartments. There's a good bit of that involved when it's a parent that's actually trafficking a child. So those are just some of the different places that you're going to see the venues of trafficking. Now, what is force, fraud, and coercion? Because remember, for it to be human trafficking, there has to be force, fraud, or coercion unless the person is under the age of 18. So what we need to have to be able to prosecute somebody to be a victim of human trafficking is to have one of these elements from one of these columns. Now, that does not mean one element from each column. That just means one of these from any of these columns. Now, force. If you rape someone, if you kidnap them, if you chain them down, if you force drug dependence, all of those things have some kind of things that you might be able to prove if you went into a court of law. And when you look at fraud, if you lure a victim from another country, if you promise them work, you promise them marriage, if you promise them a better life, and then they get here and that doesn't happen, there's going to be some kind of trail of evidence on that as well, an e-trail, let's say. The problem is when you get into coercion. If you can make somebody believe that something really bad is going to happen, then you can get somebody involved in trafficking even though they don't really know if it could happen. So let's take this a little further. If I can manipulate a 15-year-old child to do what I want them to do and tell them something horrible is going to happen if you don't do this act, that's the problem. It's so hard to prove coercion. It's a he said, she said thing. And this is how our kids are getting trafficked through this coercion. Now, some of the different forms of coercion. If I withhold food, if I isolate and won't let someone speak, forces victims to have abortions. If I control your documents, your ID documents. Branding victims is another. Forces victims to commit crimes, then you have somebody that is always in trouble with the law already, so they're certainly not going to come forward by any means. If I beat, abuse victims, commit rape, manipulate addiction, but then there's also the psychological, and I think this is even the more damaging, quite frankly. If I promise love and a future to someone that hasn't not had that in their life, that can really do a lot of damage and can really make someone fall for something like this, for lack of a better term. What about if family members are threatened? If I tell you that something's going to happen to your parents if you don't do what I want you to do, that's really powerful to a kid. They don't know what to do with that. Uh, Often our victims are so afraid of the police because there has been some misconduct in the past, or they're threatened with deportation, especially right now. And blackmail is another big one. Let's say if I'm a 15-year-old kid and I sent a sexting picture to someone and they say, you know what, now that I have this picture, I'm going to send it to your whole school if you don't go and sleep with this person for money. Okay, you got that 15-year-old kid that thinks, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? My whole school is going to see these pictures of me. My parents will see these pictures of me. The police will probably get involved. This kid might really go ahead and do something that they regret and that they get themselves in deeper with because of blackmail. And that's something that's happened a good bit. So who's involved in trafficking? The recruiter. This is often a family member, quite frankly, but it's somebody usually close, somebody that knows the victim, that is trusted by the victim. And this is the person that's kind of get that person, that young person or whomever that victim is, to trust them to go and do something. The trafficker is the one that controls this victim. They're the one that that holds everything over them. They're the one that has the power. They're the one that threatens. They're also the one that makes all the money. The victim can be absolutely anybody. And the one thing we don't ever really talk about is the consumer, because the consumer funds this whole human trafficking industry. And if we didn't have that consumer, we would have absolutely no human trafficking, and we would not have any victims suffering from this kind of abuse. So who can be a victim? This is the thing, absolutely anybody can be a victim. They can be adults, children, ethnicity, doesn't matter, religion, nationality, they can be citizens or foreigners, they can be documented or undocumented, have formal education or none. One victim I met at one point from a school, she was in college and she had done really well, and her family had been behind her. Some horrible things happened in her life that she was beyond her control. Her parents kicked her out, and within 6 months, she was a victim of trafficking because she had nowhere to stay. She had to stay on some people's couches, and before you knew it, she was involved with drugs, and she was involved with somebody had been selling her. And it was just really a shame to see this kid that, had was doing so well in college and had such a bright future, and probably at this point is probably not even here anymore, quite frankly. Gender, can be men, women, can be transgender. They're definitely at a greater risk when often parents will kick out a transgender or a gay child. That's happened a good bit. So who are the big targets? Anyone can be, but somebody younger is who are the biggest targets, right? 12 to 14-year-old kids, abused, isolated, looking for love. Okay, now I speak a lot with my victims being female because they actually are female, but you have to also understand there's also male and obviously transgender and all these other. So if let's take a 15-year-old female who has had abuse in her life, who has grown up perhaps without our father who just wants to be loved. This is a big target because these predators they can see this. They're able to get into these kids' lives through some things I'll tell you about here in a minute. But these are some of the things that we really have to be careful that we're looking after kids that maybe nobody else is looking after. All right, how about the 28 million American kids that live on the streets? Runaways, foster kids, disabled, transgender, and a disability. This is going to make a kid easier to walk away from their own home. You get a kid on the spectrum, you can convince them much easier that they can have a better life, doing something else than they have right now. And these kids have no idea what they're getting involved in. And they're not signing up for this, but they're getting tricked. And it just ends up really bad. So, what are some of the systemic factors? 26% of Kentucky kids are homeless at some point during their childhood, which is extremely high. How about the runaways? Some 2 million in the United States at any given time. The poverty rate, 1 in 30 in childhood. Foster care, we have at least 8,000 in Kentucky, probably more. And these are all kids that have been abused or neglected already and are at a higher risk. And the drug trade, heroin is really big right now. But there was a drug before heroin, and there's going to be a drug after heroin. There's always going to be these drugs that make people make really bad decisions. Now, I think heroin is particularly worse than a lot of the other drugs, and we have a lot of people that have actually sold, infants and babies for heroin. So there's just a lot of crazy stuff that goes along with that. So what makes a kid really susceptible to becoming a victim of trafficking? And this is early childhood sexual abuse. I love this picture because it says the women, if we can go back, thank you. The women on the street today are the children that we failed to protect yesterday. And because that's the truth, these are people that we didn't protect, that we didn't see, and we need to start trying to notice these things beforehand, before they get out of control, before we lose this person. So sexual abuse in childhood, the majority will tell you that this incident of them being trafficked is not even their worst trauma that they've ever had. What they'll tell you is their greatest trauma is that first time that they were sexually abused, which is probably in early childhood. The majority has a history, and the statistics will tell you like 95% of people that are trafficking victims have had some kind of sexual abuse as a young child, right? Everyone I've ever met, victim-wise, has had that in their past, every single one of them. So, do you know a kid who lacks adult supervision, is overly compliant, passive or withdrawn perhaps, shows sudden changes in behavior or school performance, is always watchful, as though waiting for something bad to happen, has not received any kind of help for medical problems brought forth to the parents' attention, comes to programs early, stays late, and doesn't want to leave? My kids, I know if I have them stay in aftercare, I am getting calls every 15 minutes to come pick them up. These kids are really happy to not be at home, and they make that known. How about a kid who has a learning problem, difficulty concentrating, perhaps has gone through testing and they can't really figure out why? So, some of the early childhood effects from early childhood sexual abuse. This is a picture of me going to Girl Scout camp. And by this time, I was already older than 6, which was when I was originally first abused. Because of the sexual childhood effects and abuse, these are just some of the things that I dealt with. And I know that they're very common among others. Suicide attempts, I had multiple. Promiscuous, I was very promiscuous at times. Which is very life-altering for many different reasons. Depression, it was a big thing. Poor peer relationships. I never knew how to be a kid because this happened to me before, right around first grade or before first grade. So, I just didn't understand how to be a kid. with other kids. Drug and alcohol abuse. Thankfully, I never got in too deep. I did take alcohol to school in middle school continually, but never really got caught with it. So thankfully, that stopped at some point. Here's a big one: won't make eye contact. For me, at least, you kind of try to figure out ways you can keep yourself safe. Mine was to not make eye contact with men. If I didn't make eye contact with men, then they didn't have any control over me. Now, if I did, then all bets were off. So if you see somebody that's not going to make eye contact with you, you know, you got to wonder, why are they not? I mean, that's a big thing. Running away from home. I ran away from home 5 or 6 times. Um, Went to stay at a shelter once. That was probably the best thing I ever did here in Louisville. The worst thing was the last time, and that had life-altering consequences at 19 years old. Compulsive eating and anorexia. I've gone back and forth. Right now, I try to stay in the middle, thankfully. Fear of intimacy or closeness. Sudden drop in school performance. That's kind of hard to say because when I started school, this had just happened. Fear of seductiveness towards males. And the big one, which everybody hears about now, was the self-injury. With cutting, you have a lot of kids cutting these days, and a lot of people think it's just to have some kind of attention. It's all an attention getting thing, but it isn't necessarily. For somebody to go to the extent that they will, cut themselves or burn themselves or break a bone, there's a lot of anger inside. I know for me, it was a way that I could show my anger without showing it, because really nobody ever knew it when I did self-abuse. When I did break a couple of bones, nobody really knew it. I would never explain how it happened. Yeah, I did get a cast a couple of times, but nobody knew the real truth about how or why it was happening. But it was just this self-anger that I couldn't do anything else with. And for me, that's why I cut, and that's why I burned, and that's why I broke. But whenever you've got a kid that's involved in some of these, you really seriously need to start getting involved with this kid, because there's some serious things going on with him. All right, so let's move on. All prostitutes are willing, correct? What are some myths and stereotypes? Now, if you've ever seen the movie Pretty Woman, it was this great movie with Julie Roberts, and she was at first this prostitute, and then she got all dressed up because Richard Gere, got her all dressed up, took her to fancy restaurants, drank champagne. She just had the world at her feet. But it made every little girl look at that back then and think, gosh, that's what I want. And if you think about it, they were really saying, that's what I want. I want to be in this kind of life, where somebody takes me away from it, but what's the reality? The reality is not Julie Roberts and Pretty Woman. The reality is the other lady on here, she does, it says, okay, some of the myths and stereotypes that she has chosen this kind of life. The majority of the time, this life has really chosen her. That she's a bad kid, or she was a bad kid, and that's why this happened to her. That's not true. That she has all the power and control. If you look, she has bruises all over her body because you know what? Guys can beat her up and the police won't be called. That she's taken advantage of men. That this is a victimless crime, perhaps. That it's not a problem here in Louisville or wherever it is you're from. That it only happens to girls. That they're all just drug addicts. And mind you, the majority are. That all the pimps and traffickers are male. All those things are myths and stereotypes. They're just not true. So what does prostitution and human trafficking really look like? And what are the impacts? The average age of death for a woman in prostitution or trafficking is 34 years old. And children involved in trafficking have a lifespan of 10 years. Now, if you look at these pictures, this is all of one young lady. And at the very first, you can say she's definitely under the age of 18. It's probably a school picture. So she would definitely be a victim of human trafficking, of human sex trafficking. But if you look at all these pictures as they go on, you think, well, is she really a victim anymore? Because the thing with sex trafficking especially is people will go in and out of being, quote, victims. Now, you can have somebody that is being sex trafficked and then might start working on their own or agreeing. But you have to realize, if you really want to look at this person as a whole, they've been victimized probably the majority of their life. And that's kind of how people get stuck in trafficking. So why would somebody do this? Why would somebody get somebody involved in trafficking? Why do these things happen? It's all money. It's absolutely money. There's so much money to be made. It's more money than Nike, Google, and Starbucks put together for a year. There's just massive amounts of money to be made if you're willing to do this to someone. It's all about the money. So, who do you think traffickers are? We all get in our head because we watch movies about who we think the traffickers are going to be. Movies will tell us they're going to look a certain way, they're going to act a certain way, they're going to dress a certain way, but is that the reality? It actually is not. I mean, these are just some arrests in Kentuckiana for related charges. Okay. But if you look at these different people, they're anybody and they're everybody. I mean, you have business owners, you have restaurant owners, truck drivers, you have police officers, the federal judge, you even have mom and dad. Traffickers can look like absolutely anybody. You can't get into thinking that they're only going to look like a certain kind of person, because you would be wrong on that. Now, what is a pimp going to say if he goes to court? He's going to say, well, this person initially said that they would do it, or that, well, I paid him or her some wages. How about the victim is better off than they were where I got them from? And this is the big one. They had the opportunity to flee. And we'll talk about that in a minute. What are some of the contributing factors with trafficking? What's driving the bus? What keeps it going? Now, back a few years ago, a site named Backpage.com was shut down. Now, this was a site where people were bought and sold, and there was just hundreds and hundreds of ads everywhere in every city. And people would go and they had certain emojis they used and all these different things, and people would go and they would buy these people. Some were victims of human trafficking, some were probably not victims of human trafficking, and it was hard to say. You couldn't really tell either way. What happened is eventually the government says, you know what, we're shutting this down. And you got to think, okay, that was probably a good thing, yes? But the only problem with that was, now, after this happened, they shut that down. It turned into hundreds and hundreds of sites now where people are being bought and sold. It just exploded. We used to be able to go and look on this one website before and see if we could find faces, so that we could find some of these kids that go missing all the time and try and find them. And, the police could do stings and get these kids out. Now we can't even begin to do that hardly, because there are absolutely so many sites where people are being bought and sold, even through Facebook. It happens on all these sites. And with the Bitcoins, if you don't know anything about them, they are a cryptocurrency, which is really interesting how these things come and get ingrained in us before we've got one problem down, they've already figured out, a fix to another problem. And as soon as Visa and MasterCard said we're not going to be used anymore, to purchase people on these things, Bitcoins came out. It's a cryptocurrency, and there's no way to find out whose it was, where it came from, or anything else. It's like, it just, excuse me, but it's like it's never happened. So what events fuel commercial sex? It's really interesting, because anytime you bring any of these kind of things into an area such as Louisville, or any city that you're from, I mean, even Hopkinsville, We used to be able to track the numbers of what we believed were happening with the Backpage.com. We can't do that anymore, but what we would see back when we could is that certain times of the year and certain things that would come in town, we would have a big influx of ads. There would be a whole lot more. And then whenever that area, the Derby or whatever was over, our ads would go down. When we had the NCAA March Madness, the Sweet 16, ours went up some 75%. And the next day it went down about that much and went to the next city that they were out, and their ads went up dramatically. So, I mean, basically, and I hate to put it this way, but whenever you bring money and a lot of people, men, into town, you get a real big increase on these kind of things. So, how do they get their victims? Can be through gangs, abduction, which is a little less common for this kind of sex crime, foster kids, runaways, sold by their parents, the grooming process, internet trap, maybe an unstable home life, induced by a boyfriend. If you'll just do it this one time for me, then we can get the car and leave the state. But it usually doesn't turn out that way. Fake job advertisements, kids with disabilities, or targeted at schools or malls. And that's happened at schools all over the country. There are some news stories back in Florida of several schools that were targeted quite a bit, and it does happen here in our city as well. Social media. So whenever we give kids phones, we let absolutely anybody in our home. And some of these apps that are on their phones are just out and out ridiculous if you look at what they do and what these kids can do with them. You've got the fake calculator where you can hide all the photos and the videos with a password so the parent never knows. All kinds of dating apps. Snapchat, which if you're a parent and you don't know about Snapchat, you seriously need to look into this. There's so many kids that have gotten in so much trouble. We've also had a lot of actual suicides because of Snapchat. It's just a particularly bad one, I think. Now, though, the kids can track each other on Snapchat, which is really, really scary if you think about it. Kick Messenger. Now, the thing with apps is they come up with new ones continually, and tomorrow there's going to be a bunch of new ones. So we're never going to be 100% on what all these things do, but we've got to kind of get control so that we know what our kids are up to, because this is where they're going to be reached out to from these things through these social media sites, with predators. And that's what's happening with these kids that walk away from their home. So the grooming process, and this is kind of like domestic violence as well. So let's just say that start out with targeting. Let's say this trafficker wants a victim who is, around 13 years old, who has black hair, who has blue eyes. He can actually target because, every kid that's on the internet and has a social media site has their picture all over it. So he can figure out all the girls in this area that meet his qualifications, and he can send them all stuff, and he might get one or two that bite. Next, gain trust. What does he need to do to gain her trust? If it's a girl, can be a boy too. What does he need to say? How does he need to talk to this child? He's going to want to be very involved. Parents, and I know myself as well, sometimes we can get so busy doing our work, whatever our work is, that we don't have a lot of time to sit around and talk to our kids, to get around and know them and to know what they're into. He's going to gain this trust. Then he's going to fulfill a need. What need does she have? If it's a girl, maybe she wants her fingernails done, her hair done. Maybe they're getting packages in the mail, just things that aren't really making sense. If you see this going on with a kid, if it's your kid, you need to be figuring this out. Then he's going to start to isolate. Now, you can isolate somebody while they're still in the same home, right? You can have a kid that suddenly backs off from all kinds of family, that backs off from church if they're involved in church, that backs off from school friends, that just totally becomes isolated. And then the abuse is going to begin. And then after that point, all he has to do is maintain control, and that's pretty easy. So some of the trafficking warning signs. One big one is in kids in foster care. And I'll keep saying this because these kids are in great, they are just such easy prey. And these people know it. Homelessness, history of abuse, that chronic runaway, the grooming and recruiting behavior, the presence of an older boyfriend that's 10 years older or more. Tattoos or branding marks, kids that have suddenly disconnected from family and friends. Maybe a kid that stopped attending school or has a dramatic change in their behavior. Now, if you look at the one picture on there, it says a young lady whose pimp's name was Successful. That was his street name. This child was trafficked all over the country, our end of the country pretty much, sold through Kentucky, recovered in North Carolina. What you'll find though is a lot of these tattoos on these victims. If you look at the next screen, it'll show you some of the different kinds of tattoos, and there can be, that's just limitless what they might have. Usually they are going to use their street name, the pimp's street name. So you might see a group of young ladies that have the same tattoo on them. I mean, that would be a big indicator. You might see a tattoo that has the crown like a king would wear. That is more indicative of prostitution and trafficking. You might see it in a place that's a little more hidden, like the inside of the mouth, or you might see it somewhere on the neck or the face or anywhere else. It doesn't matter. But the biggest thing is that this pimp wants you to know that this is really his property, not anybody else's. And that's what it's all about. Now, there is a certain kind of language that's used with trafficking and with prostitution, and these are just some of the different kind of slangs with some of the different definitions. If you hear a kid talking with some of this kind of slang, it's something you really need to look into right away. So some of the red flags. What about a kid that would have a bunch of hotel keys? I mean, that would make you kind of wonder. What about a kid with multiple phones? Now, I used to say, what about a kid has more than one phone? They have two phones. Why would they have two? But then the kids started telling me, well, mom buys me one and dad buys me one. So, okay, sometimes kids do have two phones, but often there'll be a whole lot of other kind of ways that that predators can get to these kids. Sometimes it's phones, sometimes it's computers, tablets, all these different things. You got to start wondering when there's all this kind of stuff that this kid's involved with. How about false IDs, multiple condoms, poker chips, and tokens? Sometimes they're used for cash to keep the trafficker from actually ending up in jail. Excess amounts of cash, perhaps. So, is the person fearful, timid, or submissive? Are they with somebody that seems to be in total control of them? Yeah, they're not allowed to speak for themselves, because that's what you're going to normally find. No, this person, this victim, is not allowed to answer questions. And if they do answer any kind of questions, it's a real prefab kind of answer. They're coached on what to say. Now, does this person have freedom of movement? Can they go where they want? Can this person leave where they live at? Are there unreasonable safety measures? Are they disoriented or confused? One young victim who was selling something that I met up with in a neighborhood once, he didn't even know that he was in Louisville. He thought he was in Cincinnati, Ohio. It's the thing, these people, it doesn't matter where they're at because they don't get to make any of these choices. So if they are confused about where they're at or disoriented, that's going to be a big sign. Do they show signs of mental or physical abuse? Are they being denied food, water, sleep, or medical care? Are they living in unsuitable conditions? And do they lack personal possessions? These are just some things that are red flags. Now, this is a big thing because people have such a hard time understanding it. If victims are out in public, why don't they just leave? Why don't they run away and say, I'm being a victim of human trafficking, please help me? If you start looking at the the things that have been done to this person, you're going to find that they're going to have a lot of trauma bonding with their abusers. They're going to have a lot of psychological trauma. There is intense shame and anger that comes along with this. There's drug addiction. Sometimes it's facilitated by the pimp, sometimes not. That they've become isolated from their support systems. They don't have anyone to go to. They distrust police or service providers, that they're going to blame themselves for what happened to them to begin with. That there's some kind of PTSD, that there's too much fear to walk away. They might not understand our culture or have some kind of debt that they feel they have to pay off. They might not have ID documents and they fear being deported. And they might not understand the laws or even speak English. So see, there's a lot of reasons why somebody's not going to walk away from being a victim of human trafficking, whether it be sex or labor. So where to get help? The National Human Trafficking Hotline is something that's available 24 hours a day. Anywhere in the United States, you can call this number. They can facilitate over 200 different languages to be able to talk to this person. You can also call them if you have just questions about trafficking, if you don't understand, if you think something looks like trafficking but you're not sure, you can call this number. It's a good number to put in your phone. It is a number you need to have handy on you at all times because you never know when you're going to meet up with somebody that's been victimized. If you're ever meet up with somebody you think has been victimized, do yourself one favor though, do not get involved at that point. You need to simply dial 911 or call the hotline reporting number because it can be too dangerous. So there are some laws, and I don't go really heavy into the laws because I want to keep this at a level where we're all kind of at, you know. So what we need to know is any commercial sex, prostitution, pornography, or stripping involving a minor, or any kind of labor involving a minor, there does not have to be any kind of force, fraud, or coercion, that this person 100% of the time is a victim. And at least in Kentucky, we have a law that says that you're mandated to report any kind of sexual abuse of a child, physical, mental, or sexual abuse of a child. So in Kentucky, also, if you were to say that this person, you think that they've been trafficked, they can try and sue you, but we have things in the law that keep you safe from that because we want people to be able to come forward and hopefully, help this kid. And I know Kentucky does that. I'm not sure about every other state though. So with this victim, preventative care is virtually non-existent. It means health problems have not been treated in early stages. They tend to fester until they become life-endangering situations. Healthcare frequently is administered by an unqualified house doctor that has been hired by the trafficker. And, this person is going to be one that probably, well, he's one that also does abortions at times. He takes care of these people to some extent, but he doesn't have the infection or contamination control. And there's just all kinds of issues with that with somebody that's not obviously a medical doctor. So some healthcare issues. History of drug use is going to be pretty much the majority of times. There's going to be evidence of sexual trauma, presence of unexplained or unusual scar tissue, probably from forced abortions, a history of botched or unsafe abortions, history of untreated STDs, HIV, pelvic pain, rectal trauma, urinary difficulties from rape and prostitution, all of these things that you're going to expect. Infections, mutilations caused by unsanitary and dangerous medical procedures by this house doctor, perhaps. Bruises, scars. You're going to see scars from physical abuse and probably from torture as well. Sex trafficking victims are often beaten where you're not necessarily going to see it, just so that they can look better. Malnourishment. They're going to be malnourished. They're going to have a lot of dental problems, and especially children are going to have a lot of dental problems because they're not going to have ever been treated, by a dentist or had the proper food or nutrition to have a healthy mouth with teeth. Some of the mental health indicators, 68% are going to have PTSD. I think it's probably higher than that, but that's what they tell us. Anxiety disorder, 76%. Panic disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. You got to think with this, if a person cannot control anything in their life, they're going to tend to obsess on one thing that they can control. And that's kind of part of that, being able to have some kind of control. Dissociative symptoms, multiple personalities, major depressive disorder, explosive anger disorder, and substance abuse disorders. Signs of self-injury, like I said, the multiple or recurrent STIs, multiple or short time between pregnancies, signs of sexual trauma, unusual scar tissues, fractures, bruises, violence, drug health-related issues, headaches, back or abdominal pain, malnutrition, dehydration, cigarette burns, ligature marks, prolonged infection control. All those kind of things are to be expected. Communicate. We want to communicate away from everyone else with this victim. We want to let them know that there is help for them if they're ready, if they want help, that we can help them. We want to limit the number of people that come around if somebody has self-identified. We need to be super careful that no one else is you don't have a lot of people coming around trying to figure out what's going on. You need to remember also that trafficking victim has absolutely no meaning to this victim. They don't understand the term. Some questions: can you leave your work or job if you want? Can you go where you want to? Have you been threatened? Has anyone threatened your family? What are your working conditions? Where do you sleep and eat? Do you have to ask permission before you sleep and eat or to go to the bathroom? Is there a lock on your door or window? Just some things we can ask. Make sure, like I said, to isolate anybody that has self-identified so you don't have a lot of people around. You do not want to have somebody that's with that person talking for them. You want to have them separated, especially in the health clinic policies, to have that patient alone by themselves so they can talk without somebody. Enlist a trusted translator, and I'm not just talking about somebody that speaks that language that you know or that they know. If it's a minor, it's important that you got social service involved immediately with this child. Next. Some positive messages. We want to help you. Our first priority is your safety. If you are involved in trafficking and you want to cooperate, you will not be deported. There are ways that you can stay in the United States. We can help find you a safe place to stay, can help to get you what you need. We can help to make sure this doesn't happen to someone else. You are entitled to assistance, and we can help you rebuild your life, or there is help for you to rebuild your life. Again, is anyone forcing you to do things? Have you been forced or tricked into stripping or sex acts? Have you been exchanged for something sexual to survive, such as food, shelter, or money? Are you being made to do something to pay off a debt or quota? Do you feel like you're being controlled by someone? So I hope you've learned a lot about trafficking today. There's still a whole lot more to know. Thank you for coming. Thank you for getting information. I understand we're going to take some questions, and I'll just wait for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Amy. That was Great information. I'm just going to go through a few slides and just ask you during this time, if you do have a question, go to your question section and pose the question, and we'll get to them in a moment. Again, this is our next webinar. Go to operationparent.org to register. We do provide these for free and would love to continue to be able to do that for free. We are a nonprofit. If you'd like to make a donation to Operation Parent to help us continue to do these, that would be greatly appreciated. Also, to stay informed with Operation Parent, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Sign up for our e-newsletter. You can do that at our homepage. Purchase our handbook through our website. We have a great parent handbook, one for elementary, and then another one for middle and high school students, parents of middle and high school. Host a community presentation. I do travel and go out to the community to do presentations. And just continue to attend future webinars and let people know about our webinars. So let me scoot back here to the questions and let's see what we've got. Let's see here, hold on. All right, we do have some questions. So let me get up here. In what counties in North Carolina are human trafficking most prevalent? I'm not sure you would know about North Carolina.
Probably not so much, but you have to figure out wherever the interstate systems that travel throughout the United States, wherever they're most active is where you're going to find the majority of trafficking. That and where there's areas that have a lot of hotels around that area. You can pretty much say that that would be your biggest areas for trafficking.
Can you take a victim of human trafficking to the police station, firehouse, or a hospital to be helped and get resources?
You can. The best thing to do, obviously, if the person is under 18, just call 911 to get them involved. I'm not sure about firehouses, how much they can help you, but I'm sure they can get in touch with somebody. The best thing to probably do if it's an adult is to have them call the trafficking hotline and have them get the information and go from there. I would be leery about putting somebody in your car necessarily that you don't know and you don't know the situation.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do some festivals or county fairs have any influence on trafficking?
Actually, they can. We have a big fair here in Kentucky, and I know our rates do go up some. Not dramatically, but they do go up some. Yes.
Have you worked at all with, this is an acronym, V4CR, which stands for Veterans for Child Rescue?
No, I have heard of the organization though.
Okay. Please explain trauma bonding if you can.
Okay. Let's take it with, let's say, a child that has been physically abused by a parent. Let's just put the parent in this at the moment. You know, even a child that has been physically abused by a parent always wants to be with that parent. It's a trauma bonding. It's a bond that the victim has with whoever it is that controls everything about them, that is so strong that you can't break it off easily. It's why abused children always want to go back home. It's the same kind of thing, and this just happens to be with a trafficker and a victim.
Okay. What additional resources would you recommend to gain further knowledge on human trafficking?
Absolutely. You can look for my website, freetohope.org, but there's also a lot of different organizations that do a lot of good work throughout the country and throughout the United States. Polaris is one I would check out for sure. They give a
Okay.
lot of information.
And please make sure you take a look for your handouts. Again, go ahead and download them while we're still live. And remember that you did get the handouts sent to you an hour prior to the event. I do get a lot of bounce backs on the handouts. They go into junk files. So if you are looking for it, it's coming from Mary Beth at operationparent.org. It may have gone to your junk file, so take a look there. How often do you see teens being forced to perform sex acts online or being coerced to become pimps, become cam girls by pimps?
You know, we see that a lot, unfortunately, and that's, I think, part of the reason that we have such a big influx right now with, all the kids sending sexting pictures continually. Schools are just run
Mhm.
over with them, you've got kids that are in a very precarious situation and become victimized so easily. So I would say I can't give a percentage because I don't have one, but I would say a super high amount of trafficking victims. That's how it's maybe started.
Mm. When sex traffickers are arrested, are the individuals who are being trafficked arrested as well?
It depends on. I know here in Louisville, the Louisville Metro Police Department has really come such a long way, and they're doing a great job now. They're trying to not arrest people that are being victimized by these crimes, women that are involved in prostitution, or men for that matter, but that are being prostituted. They're trying to get them help. They're not trying to arrest them. Yes, they want to put the traffickers away. They want to put the pimps away. They want to put, somebody that's doing illegal things away, but they're really trying to get help for the victims. And I really just super appreciate that. And we work with them a lot here in Louisville, and it's really been a great change.
Um, are there laws protecting someone who has been trafficked that retaliates against their pimp? Would self-defense apply to the situation?
Um, yeah, in theory it should, and there's a lot of new laws, but we also still have a lot of people that, and particularly women, we have some minors that have been put away for life for murdering their pimp, and in reality, that situation has never been worked out for these kids and for these young women that have been put away. So it's still not where it needs to be, and it's just one of those really difficult things to be able to work out and get these people out of jail. So,
How often are other young girls used to help recruit new girls? And
okay,
what does
yes.
that look like?
Okay, that if you want to get to a name, it's called a bottom bitch. Okay, and that's somebody who is been with the trafficker for a while, and he trusts her to some extent, and she has gained a little bit of better situation, and now he trusts her to go out and get new ones. So if she gets a new one, then she's going to have a little bit better of a life for a while.
Mm,
So it's kind of natural that that's going to happen a good bit. Yes.
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any, sorry, is there any prevalence of any particular drug use among children and adolescents who are trafficked?
Let's see. Was there any? I'm sorry. Can you repeat that? I didn't.
Um, is there any prevalence
Okay.
of a particular drug use
Mhm.
among children or adolescents who are trafficked?
No, I would say it kind of goes along with whatever that part of the country is into now. I think with heroin, it's definitely ramped everything up all over the country, but it's pretty much just going to be whatever's going on in that city as to what their probably the prevalence is.
Okay, and somebody else asked for the slide that had the human trafficking hotline number, so let me get
Hmm.
back to that.
Yep.
And this again, we did make a, hold on, there he goes. Okay, I'm just looking through, there it is.
There you go. Yep.
We did PDF this presentation, which means you can, it's part of the handouts, so you will have every slide for this presentation, but here it is again for you. The number is 888-378-7888, and that is the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Okay, and that looks like that is the end of the questions. Let me just check one more time. And any questions, if you do want to pose a question, go ahead and do so now. And then otherwise, anything else that you'd like to say, Amy, as we close up?
I'd just like to say, I mean, we're all parents here probably, or we deal with children. I would say really just to be able to be willing to get involved in a situation if you need to watch out for these kids that, maybe nobody's really watching out for, because once a kid is involved in this, there's probably not much chance of them getting out.
Okay. All right. Well, we really appreciate you being here today and talking about this tough subject. And I'm sure we'll have you get back again some other time. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who attended today. Again, this has been recorded. The recording will go out tomorrow. You will get an email from Operation Parent via GoToWebinar. It'll arrive in your inbox around 3 o'clock tomorrow, and that will contain the recording link as well as the survey. When I shut this down, please just hold on for a moment and you will get the survey. Will be sent to you immediately. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye, and we'll see you next month for our next webinar. Thank you.